have one remaining with the individual, and he's not going to let her leave the aircraft at this time.
He made me feel very sure that we had a very real and horrifying threat.
We don't know who he was, where he came from, or where he went.
Look, I'm going to talk to you about whether DNA can help solve the DNA Cooper mystery. Anybody interested in that by any chance? Woo! Good wave! Okay, let me see if I can get this thing to advance. You know, high-tech stuff baffles me. Oh, there it is. You see this doesn't, I'm looking at something here that doesn't move and has half the graphics missing. Okay, so forgive me. All right, we're going to try and make it work. All right, so my talk is going to be really, really simple. I'm going to give you an introduction, yes, spelled right. I'm going to talk about, you know, can DNA help solve, the D.B. Cooper mystery? I'm going to go through all the evidence. I'm going to say yes or no. You know, give you my opinions. Now, understand, these are just opinions. You know, everybody, I'm just trying to be factual. I really do appreciate a lot of the effort that's been put in over time by a number of people to try, you know, put candidates forth. I've heard a lot of stuff. I've learned a lot of stuff today. I know there's been efforts to look at the DNA before. So everybody's efforts on this are appreciated. I see Tom there. I know Eric. I've talked to him. There's Ryan. There's been tons of people. So, you know, my talk is respectful to those efforts combined with the reality of what we have today. So in that regard, then I'm going to talk to you about, you know, it's in everybody's mind. Will genealogy work to crack this case? You've probably read in the news tons of things about how genealogy does this, does that, everything is it. But it's, you know, is it a cure for the common cold case? You've got to think about that. And then in the end, if you want, I think I've buzzed this through, I have a case that I will talk about called the Somerton Man that has some characteristics very similar to D.B. Cooper. So that I do this so that not only is it an interesting case, but it also gives you some idea on how genealogy can work with rootless hair. So first I'm going to introduce myself. I have 3 slides, that's it. If this works at all, it won't advance, great. I'm stuck. I've been part of many really high-profile historical cases. I've worked on the unknown child in the Titanic. I helped the Armed Forces DNA Lab with that. I've worked on the Amelia Earhart project. I didn't work on Amelia. She's got a family. We know where they are. Fred Noonan, her navigator, was a very sort of obscure individual in the 1930s. He had been separated twice. He had no children, and for many reasons, we had to follow his mother's line and try and find a DNA reference. Well, I took about a year. I found somebody in the UK that could act as a mitochondrial DNA reference. Just take it as that fact. And I got that person's DNA, which is now in my refrigerator in California. So if they ever find a crash site and there's DNA there that doesn't belong to Amelia, the solution to the Amelia Earhart mystery might be my refrigerator in Huntington Beach. Think about that. Goes up to the highest bidder, by the way. Oh, and also, I was also involved in the Abraham Lincoln DNA project, and that's interesting because there was a doctor I worked with from Harvard who wanted to show that Abraham Lincoln had some genetic disorders. But as we kind of got into that and tried to find family references from him, and every one of these cases I could spend an hour talking about. I won't go there. But in the end, we had to get what we assumed were his family references, you know, to compare the DNA to. And I can't really go into detail, but let me put it this way. Barack Obama may not be the first African-American Islamic president. Another story for another time, sorry. Oddly enough, my first forensic case was called The Hand in the Snow. It was a Northwest flight that crashed in, Northwest, you get that? Connection, it crashed in the backcountry of Alaska in 1948. And there was 30 victims on board, and somehow I got contacted after that. It was the Armed Forces DNA lab working with the pilots. The plane crashed, it became a legend. In the 90s, 2 pilots went out actually in the backcountry of Alaska, went a couple of years, finally found it. And when they found the wreck, they found a frozen human arm in the wreckage. And when they found it, of course, they wanted to find out whose arm and hand it was. There were 30 victims on the plane, and finally, I was involved after they ruled out 25 by fingerprints and by DNA. This took about 10 years, and at the end, we ruled out 29. We had 1 more left. And so I was instrumental in finding out that in fact, we had it right, and that 30th victim was the arm and the hand, was his arm and hand. He was born in 1911. His mother was from Ireland, so he had to go into Ireland researching there. And I found probably the one person in the world I could have given that DNA living in a small village in Ireland, in Limerick. Anyway, that was my first forensic case. And then I've been part of I was a pioneer in the revolution of forensic genealogy. In 2011, I made an appointment with the Seattle Police Department to give them my idea about using genealogy to solve cold cases, and I was almost laughed out of the room, okay? But there was a DNA lady in there that kind of got the drift, and that became the first case ever attempted using genealogy. In 2015, I walked into the Phoenix Police Department with the same idea. This time they took me up on it, and that became the first case solved using genetic genealogy. And that was, you may see that somebody was talking to me about, it's called the Search for the Zombie Hunter on, I think, 2020. And then the first 2 cases solved with the revolutionary SNP testing. Joseph Newton Chambliss through the DNA Doe Project, and also Buckskin Girl, and all this happened before the Golden State Killer happened and was identified. And of course, you have to give credit for that. That's the case that really hit the news and brought all of this attention to the method of forensic genetic genealogy. And now we go on from there. So that's my background, and my cases that are relevant to the talk here is there's the Somerton man, solved that. Then there was the boy in the box, you must know that one, he's a Somerton. And I add Roxanne Wood there, even though you may not know it as a famous case, because we solved that case based on about 5 cells of the guy's body. You know, it was a murder from, I think, 1986, a woman found, murdered in her kitchen, and after so many years, the DNA went, it was almost nothing there, but we still did it. So all of these are relevant because they have to do with rootless hair, they have to do with, ancient DNA, and they have to do with more and more with less and less, which is all involved in the discussion we're going to have right now. So, and I've worked in over 50 countries in the world, forensic cases. Anyway, let's get to the point. The question is DNA going to help us solve the D.B. Cooper mystery? I think, you think DNA is really it, right? If we can get the DNA, then you can see which candidates, if any of the candidates, are the right one, or maybe none of the above. It's all really, we have to think through it, we have to look at coincidences, etc. So DNA, though, might produce some proof one way or the other. So, let's see. Possible sources of DNA, as you know. The cigarette butts. He smoked, 8 or 9 cigarettes on the plane? But if you think about the history, first of all, it was negative for fingerprints, right away when the FBI stormed the plane to collect the cigarettes. They were negative for fingerprints, and they were thrown out in, I think, 1972. So, scratch the cigarette butts. However, there are a couple of other items of interest, of course. The tie is a big discussion. There is the parachutes, and there is this mysterious slide with the rootless hair on it, right? So I'm going to go through all 3 of these, and we're going to talk about the state of the evidence, what's been done, what has not been done, and what can be done. If y'all are interested. Anybody interested? Just checking. Okay. So anyway, let's look at the famous tie first. All right. Now the tie was collected when the FBI stormed the airplane. We know that. Number two, in the 1970s, you know, the FBI, especially at the beginning, sent the tie around. They sent it, okay, I may get this wrong, from, I think, Reno, where the plane landed. Excuse me if I'm wrong, you can shout out, you know. And it was sent to FBI headquarters, it was sent back. So there was a number of FBI offices that it went through. And of course, over time, there were a number of people who had examined the tie for whatever evidence, whatever they could find. So the DNA was swabbed in 2000 by the FBI. In 2002, they came up with 3 CODIS profiles, a major and 2 minors. But after a while, you have to think, how many? That's 29 years already. So, you know, what they're seeing is probably picking up contamination. And they did the DNA exam by swabbing it. All right, but we advance now. And this was also, I think, Tom, you're out there. When Tom did the tape lift, you know, with all of the nice, you know, the elements on it, the rare elements on it, okay, forgive me if I say this wrong, but you know, you checked it for DNA. Now, whether you checked the tie or the tape, it turned out that there was a nice male profile, but unfortunately it was Tom's, okay, so, yes, yes, okay, so let's say, somebody was going to ask me about that, so I had to say that. All right, let's see, the next thing is MVAC. Who has heard about MVAC? Okay, all right. MVAC is this little DNA vacuum cleaner. And what it does is it's got a little nozzle and it sprays water and it sucks the water like a carpet cleaner all at one time. It has disinfected water, you know, sterile water. And what happens is it collects it in a bottle or a sterile container. And then, let's see, it sprays it and then the DNA the water is poured in through a filter. And the filter is sent to the lab for the DNA extraction. So Tom, I have a Tom K. original sketch of his MVAC, and I did the best I could at midnight last night to kind of make a little cartoon of what it looked like. It has a vacuum, a filter, and a nozzle. So Tom did this with the tie, right? And it didn't have water, it was sort of more of an air type sucking mechanism. And he says he has the filters. So, what's in the filters? Well, I'm going to say contamination is still a problem, but we should really look at those filters. Why not, right? Because hopefully we got MVAC itself. The real MVAC can get up to 60% more DNA from under the surface, more than swabbing. So in this case, you know, obviously there's some whatever below the surface, and so I would say, I'm going to guess it's contamination because of the history, just plain history. So, but I think it would be worth sending the DNA filters, the filters to a lab to see what DNA is present. All right, let's see. Oh, I think I did that one already. Okay, what about the spindle? Okay, let's talk about the spindles. I'm saying that the tie has had its day. I think the tie has, you know, become famous and let us remain famous. It's had its day. And I think that, you know, again, I think it's contamination. Nobody's followed one way or the other. I just think it passed through so many hands. You know, there's so many, you know, people involved, really interested. You see how much you're digging into the candidates and thinking through things. Go back in time. That's what they did with the tie. And, you know, there's just too many people. And in all fairness, you have to say in 71, you know, DNA was not even a twinkle in anybody's eye. So, you know, nobody was really thinking in advance that in 20 years, hey, 30 years, 40 years, we can get DNA off the tie. And people were saying, well, that's great, but what is DNA? Okay, duh. All right, so here's the tie. The summary is, here's a bunch of things. There's no chain of custody, so we don't know totally who handled the tie. Like today, that's more of a documentation, but we don't know who handled the tie really. We know kind of mostly where its whereabouts, but there's not a lot of hard information about the chain of custody. And what we call the tie has experienced environmental insults. And that means that it was contaminated by lots of people handling it, even, well-intentioned people will look for clues. No, that won't work. And you also have to consider it wasn't kept in a cool, dry environment. So any DNA that used to be there from D.B. Cooper is probably degraded. And, even if you could look at it, it probably is so low level compared to everyone else who has more recently handled it that you're probably not going to be able to see that underneath. It's called signal to noise ratio. The signal is very small, and then the noise is really high. So you have highly degraded DNA, and it's a mixture of maybe hundreds of people. We don't know. Lots and lots of DNA. So, okay, scratch the tie. Now, I want to say, we have the filters Tom has. We can look at those. This is my opinion. If you disagree, I'm okay with that. I don't really have a dog in the fight. I'd like to see it solved. This is what I just think. So let's look at, scratch the tie. Let's look at the parachutes. Okay, the parachute, let's look at and I tried to read and research, and I may not say this exactly right, but the bag, the reserve chute bag, the shroud, the cords, what can be done? He cannibalized that reserve chute, for the cords to tie the money to himself. What can be done? Because he had to handle that, right? Well, let's think about that. Here is a picture of, looking at the cords at the FBI. Hi, Tom. And so I want to ask the audience here, do you notice anything about the picture? Anybody notice anything? Lisa, no, Lisa works for me. She's really great. Raise your hand. You can ask her genealogy questions too. She's my right-hand man, lady, friend. Raise your hand if you see something about the picture. That's kind of special. Okay. I hope you're right. You see? Oops. Right? I'm sorry. And again, it's probably already contaminated. It's probably going to make a difference. But handling the cords, and touching them, well, that just adds to the mixture on it, right? So anyway, that let's say, I would not say that's a candidate for DNA or for MVAC, but what about the main parachute? The one, now this is a picture of the one in the Washington Museum, the Washington Historical Museum. And you see there's the card, right? The packing card. And this is also a subject of discussion. So let's talk about the packing card. I will draw your attention to the fact there's 3 dates on the packing card. What influences do the 3 dates on the packing card have with DNA? You don't answer, and there's some people who talked about this. Any idea? And raise your hand if you know the issue with the dates on the packing card. Okay, we talked about that. I told you. So the problem is that if you have 3 dates, now the first date is by Earl Cossey. The second one is by William, I can't read the last name, he signed it twice. And the packing card is the signature of the man who packed the parachute to make sure the right person is the credentials and the date it was packed. That means, okay, let's assume D.B. Cooper, pulled it out, making sure it was packed correctly. That means you have D.B.'s DNA on the card plus 2 other people, and in addition, you have a 4th person who pulled the card out to take the picture. So you're already starting with 4 people on the card, and you have to say how many other people pulled that out over time, right? So that again, that presents a problem. It's contamination again. So the theme of all the stuff so far is contamination. So let's scratch the parachutes. Now we get to the hair. All right. The hair, this is just another hair from another case I worked on. And the hair was left supposedly on the back seat where he was sitting. Now I've talked to a couple of people about this. The plane had other stops, it had other passengers. My understanding so far from Ryan is that nobody else sat in that seat. So, okay, let's talk about the hair. Hair is really interesting. because hair comes from, the DNA in hair comes from the interior of the hair, not the exterior, so contamination really isn't an issue, right? And so there's some not so good news about hair. And the first one is that different people have different amounts of DNA in their hair. So we don't know if maybe he had tons of DNA or he had just a lot of DNA, but he had DNA in his hair. But just put you on the alert that suppose magically we find the hair and we're working on it, you don't know how much DNA you're going to get, even if it's not contaminated in good shape. So you can hold the thought. That doesn't prevent us from trying. Then we have, does the hair belong to D.B. Cooper? Okay, you know, he was apparently the only one sitting in that seat, so, you know, definite maybe on that. And the last one is, where is it anyway? The last known whereabouts of this hair was in 1984 in Las Vegas. Now that, you can debate on that. That's what my research, what the guys have told me. If anybody knows where it is, raise your hand. Okay, now don't hide, don't keep it a secret from everybody. Speaking of, you know, that's goes highest bidder again, right? So, you know, we don't know where the hair is, and, you know, guys, I know Ryan's really trying hard to, you can't FOIA request physical evidence, but you can FOIA any documentation about where that evidence may be. So I understand that there's documentation that the cigarettes have been destroyed, but the hair kind of goes into the twilight zone about 1984. So the question is, there's no record of it being destroyed, and there's no record of where it might be anyway. So, you know, the idea would be to get the FBI to start looking and finding out what might have happened. We may never find it, but we might, but we won't find it if we don't look. So, let's talk about the hair. Maybe, definite maybe. All right, so here's a few things about what do we do if we do get DNA. Well, let's talk about that. Because, first of all, let's talk about if we can use genealogy on the hair. Because, you know, genealogy has been used to crack some really hard cases. Now, if this was a case of a homicide, sexual assault, we have lots of DNA all over the place. Hey, police come in, swab it, get the CODIS markers, put it in CODIS, find the guy, and, you know, the rest is history. But when you have really bad DNA, that doesn't necessarily work. If you have little teeny pieces of highly degraded DNA, you know, the little teeny and the CODIS markers are really big, can't do it. So sometimes forensic genealogy is the only thing you can use for really bad DNA. So how does this work? Okay, just a couple of slides on background. A lot of you may already know this, that the CODIS is what is the conventional way of human identification. Law enforcement uses 20 CODIS markers. They are 20 pieces of well-characterized real estate. That means they're easy to reproduce. If you do CODIS markers in New York, you're going to get the same CODIS markers in California. They're inexpensive, they've been automated. You know, they're conventional, it's 30 years, people know how to do this. They're called autosomal STRs, and S, short tandem repeat. And the important thing is that S stands for short. That means that marker has a length. It's either short, it's longer, maybe a little bit shorter, maybe a little bit longer, but it's a piece of DNA. And it's the legal form of identification. So if you find DNA at a crime scene, you think you have a perpetrator, you have to match his DNA to the crime scene, and then he can get arrested. He gets brought to the police station, and he gets his DNA taken again, and videotaped, and barcoded, so that is the DNA sample that gets used in court. Forensic genealogy uses something called SNPs. Direct-to-consumer DTC companies use not 20 markers, they use 1.2 million SNPs. And SNP is a very complicated name, but the S stands for single. So that means every SNP is just a point. It's not a piece of real estate, it's a point. So now, when like when you do CODIS, you either match or you don't. You're either the guy or you're not. You get arrested or you don't. It's cut and dry. But with SNPs, it's different because you have 1.2 million points, and you get into kind of a way where you can say, not do I match exactly your 1.2 million points. You can start talking about how many of my points do I match with you. The more I match with you, the more DNA I share, and the closer I'm related. You can start talking about relationships based on the fraction of points or DNA you share with another person. So how many SNPs of the percent of these 1.2 million you share? If I share half of mine with you, you have to be my parent or my child. If I share 10%, you have to be my first cousin. If I share 3%, we're second cousins. And that starts to bring in the idea of genealogy. CODIS has 20 markers. Forensic genealogy uses 1.2 million SNPs. CODIS is either match or it's not a match, but a genealogy can start to talk about relationships. If I have 3 people and I'm matching the CODIS, one's going to match, the other 2 aren't. Okay, that's done. But if I have 3 people that match me with the genealogy, I have all these cousins in front of me. They match sort of, sometimes partly. Using all that information, it's very rich. It's not yes or no. It's, gosh, we had a case in Orange County of a Jane Doe, and she was from the oldest Orange County Jane Doe from 1968. And for a long time, we thought she was from New York because of the shoes she wore and a business card in her pocket. We did the genealogy, we did whatever we do. We looked at all of her, we called DNA cousins in the database. They were all from Maine. Immediately, the gal was from Maine, or her family was from Maine. She could have been born in Okinawa, right? Because her father was in the service, but her family was from Maine, and that started, we could even almost tell the county. So that started what became, a success story a couple of weeks later. That was really interesting. So when you do SNPs, it's very rich. You can even see if somebody's Jewish. You can see if their mom is Caucasian, their dad is Asian. You can see their mix. You can see if somebody is Native American, African American. It's very rich. CODIS was picked, those 20 markers were picked to not give any information on anything. Just is it matched or not. Not any kind of ethnic background, no ethnicity, no nothing. But now with genealogy, you can pull out a ton of stuff from it. CODIS, sometimes they let you sort of get a match, but even so, it's called familial searching, and it's available in 12 states. But it's still, you're very limited to the very close family members, like a mom, a parent, a child, maybe a sibling, but it doesn't reach any deeper than that. But with genealogy, you can 5th to 8th cousins, even more. I was involved in a case we solved, and we had tons of 8th to 10th cousins. And another story for another time, we solved it. So you can reach way deeper in the family with genealogy. However, let's go back. With genealogy right now, it's only investigative leads. When we figure out who donated this DNA to a crime, or who is a Jane Doe, we turn it over to the police, and they go and they do the CODIS markers and do the legal identification. It's kind of out of our hands at that point, although we do help. So, this is kind of a little background. Let's talk about, we're going to talk about rootless hair in a minute. That's the big deal, right? The hair is the last ditch effort here. The hair, you can't have the STRs from CODIS. It doesn't work. Occasionally it will, but don't even think about it right now. You have to use the SNPs. You have to use SNPs or genealogy to do any kind of identification. Keep in mind, FGG can't handle mixtures. You can't handle mixtures unless you have 2 people, and the guy you're looking for is the major contributor. That's it. Tons of people are working on to crack this, so that because in a sexual assault, you'll have a woman's DNA, tons of that, and not so much male DNA. We can't do that. we have to have the male, the major, and maybe a little bit of the woman's DNA. So there's a lot of efforts to try and make mixtures better, when FGG better for handling mixtures. And that's going to be important because, as I said, we have contamination we have to deal with on all the other relics that we're looking at. SNP testing came from the biomedical industry. You know, as I said, the law enforcement agencies, we're doing CODIS for 30 years. Everybody got the drill. Everybody got that. Oh my God, genealogy came from nowhere. It came from Ancestry.com. We were doing with adoption searches, and that was completely different from law enforcement. So when all of this happened, and now we're applying it to cold cases, the crime labs aren't necessarily equipped to do what we need to do. So for that reason, you can't just say, hey, the crime lab handled it, I'm gonna go ahead and see what they have over there, you know, what kind of markers, because you can't use the CODIS markers. You must retest the evidence, and the CODIS markers don't work. So if you're dealing with any kind of case, and you do have that crime lab type stuff, you have to retest the evidence, and that's why we have to get more DNA here. Thank you for listening.